Okay, so having heard there on some of the stuff that's going on in the internal audit world and risks there, we're now going to move back to another session that talks about collaboration. And in this case, the collaboration between National Audit Office and the Commission for the Audit of New European Programmes. I'm really pleased to welcome two guests here who are going to speak to us about that in a co-presentation. We've got Mark Shelford, who's Head of Unit for the Recovery and Resilience Facility at the European Commission, and Sari Anttila, who is Chief Audit Executive of the Minister of Agriculture and Forestry in Finland. Now, Sari, you won't know this, but we've been having a bit of an ongoing conversation with some of our some of the people who are presenting today about what the weather is like in various parts of Europe. So can I ask what it's like in Finland at the moment?
Thank you, Joanne, for asking that. Yes, my name is Sari Anttila, and thank you for this opportunity to participate this forum and this panel discussion as well. So the weather in Finland is right now, it's sun is shining and it's very cold. It's about it's quite near 0 degrees Celsius, but last week we had already 15 degrees plus, so it's a big difference. And it's the wind is it's very cold. Yes, thank you.
Oh, great. Mark, I'm going to ask what it's like for you as well before we get started. How is the weather for you?
But the same, we're experiencing 2 seasons in 1 week. Actually, 20 degrees this weekend, and now 6-7 degrees, but also with a very cold wind. I think the wind is coming from Finland, actually. So.
Indeed, yeah. It was definitely too early to put away our woolly jumpers last week when spring and summer came to us in 1 week, yeah. Wasn't it?
I just put it out before the session.
Yeah.
I just put my jumper before the session, so.
It's great to have you both here, and thank you very much. We're going to go through this in a question and answer format. So, Mark, if I could start with you. The process of auditing European funds varies based on the type of funds. I wonder if you could briefly describe for us the differences in terms of audit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can actually make a distinction between 3 different types of implementation and also 3 different types of auditing. So the most difficult one is, of course, the implementation through what we call actual incurred expenditure, where beneficiaries have to demonstrate their costs, their invoices, their timesheets, and what have you. So those types of implementation are, of course, very much error prone. Also because there's all the legality and regularity conditions such as public procurement, so there cannot be any breaches of public procurement, state aid, everything you have there. So traditionally, our audits and the audits from the Court of Auditors find a lot of errors there, which then leads to very high error rates in the accounts. A second way of implementing funds is through what we call simplified cost options. Mostly this is a unit cost or a lump sum or a flat rate. But there, of course, most of the audit and verification work will happen at the for the costing element will happen at the moment where the flat rate or the lump sum or the unit cost is defined. So you want to see that what you are paying for an output is reasonable, is based on reasonable costs and whatever, eligible costs. And there the audit work would then, in a later stage, be directed towards verifying the performance, the number of hours of training, the number of kilometers of road, and so on. Now, for the Recovery and Resilience Facility, all of this has been even further simplified, I think. There is a mixture of reforms and investments for which the Commission will pay certain predefined amounts. But there is no absolute link between costing and the payments we make. So there is a costing element considered at the approval of the plans, but then once the plans have been approved, we decouple the underlying expenditure, or how to say, historic expenditure or foreseen expenditure from the payments that we make. So when a member state tells us, for instance, we have now the Spanish payment, that Spanish payment has 51 reforms, so entry into force of law, no costs involved, but the Commission has decided to pay 10 billion euro because this was part of the plan. So there, for us, of course, the challenge is to make sure that what we get in a payment request in terms of, on the one hand, entry into force of law is actually what we expect it to be qualitatively, but also for investments where there is a quantitative and a qualitative element to see that that investment meets the expectations raised in the Recovery and Resilience Plan. So there, the audit will focus more on those elements.
Thank you. Sorry, what elements of those different types of audit are you involved in your role at the moment?
Thank you. I think that, however, there is, of course, many of those differences, but there is also some similarities between different funds and as well, and in the point of view of National Audit Authority, I think. In many funds there are error rates that must be reported, and those statistical requirements, and of course, among other things, obligations to report on legality and regularity and etc. That sort of things. Yes.
Okay. Mark, I don't know whether there's anything you want to pick up on there on sort of the role of external auditors in auditing the funds.
I think there's quite a bit of involvement of external auditors in auditing the funds. In some countries more than in others. So if I can give examples, I think mostly in Spain and Italy, there's a lot of involvement of the big four or even other audit companies who then perform the tasks that we would typically expect to be done in the framework of legality and regularity for the payments and for the expenditure. So that's quite embedded in their systems. Other countries, of course, have less and then rely on their own civil servants to audit and to check legality and regularity. So it's a little bit of a mixture of both. But I think using the services of external audit companies is quite well accepted in Europe overall.
Thank you. Mark, if I can ask you to describe the process and the methodology and the standards that you use in the audit of the Recovery and Resilience funds, which are the funds that we're going to focus on this afternoon.
Yeah, I think we had a presentation, no? Is somebody going to? Yeah, there we go.
Here it is.
So evidently, we apply auditing standards. It's not so easy to find a common set of auditing standards that are, applicable to the type of work we do. But I think from the Commission's perspective, a lot of work is considered to be in line with INTUSI 4000 and following. So if we can go to the next slides, the next one, please. Yes, the next one. Here we go. So what we do basically is three types of audit work. So first, in the framework, when the plans were submitted last year, and even a couple still this year, we assess the chapter on audit and control to see whether it's in line with the legal requirements. Once the plans have been approved, then member states can start implementing. Well, they can start implementing already while the plans are there, but they can start submitting payment requests. So when a payment request comes in, our geographical desks, as we call them, they check the milestones and the targets, the investments, whether they are acceptable, achieved. But we in the audit unit, we analyze the two documents that accompany the payment request, which is the management declaration and the summary of audits. Summary of audits of all the audit work done between the last payment request and this one. And there we look for coherence to see that there are no elements that put into question certain targets or certain milestones declared in the payment request. We also look at protection of the financial interest to see that no cases of fraud, corruption, conflict of interest, etc., have not been undeclared in the management declaration and are not being corrected and recovered. And then our main task, of course, is are the ex-post audits based on our audit plan. So if we move to the next. So we do basically two types of audit work. We have system audits, and we have audits of what we call cases of investment and milestones. Evidently, the audits on milestones and targets that you see on your left-hand side on the box below, those would be typically done once the payment has been processed, because obviously we're not going to audit an investment that hasn't been accepted by the Commission, that is clear, or that we haven't paid for. The system audit work can happen at any moment. With system audits, we are basically forward-looking. Are the systems that are going to produce data reliable and complete? So there we differentiate between system audits on the systems that are implemented in respect of the milestones and targets. But we also have the system audits on the measures to protect the financial interests of the Union, which is primarily the first responsibility of the member states. If we move on, then I can tell you how we audit the milestones and targets on the next slide. So here, of course, we know already now in the Council implementing decision what is the content of each payment request. I can change, but we know for now what it is. So we have done a risk analysis of each and every milestone and target in each and every payment request up until the end of 2023. So there we have a number of predefined risk factors, as you see here, the type of measure, the number of implementing entities, the verification mechanism, etc., which we score with a score of 0 for very low risk, up to 10 when we consider the risk is high. The auditors then, on the basis of the payment request, select the high-risk targets that we are trying to audit 100%, and we try to have a decent coverage of the medium risk scores, but here again, professional judgment comes into play. Now, when we audit the systems, and first of all, the systems on milestones and targets, if we can move to 2 slides further, please. Yeah, so here again, we also apply risk analysis. There we look at the complexity of the national internal control system. So to give you an example, systems that are very centralized, let me take Luxembourg as an example. It's a very easy one. Everything is centrally organized. So there we consider the risk is lower compared to systems that are implemented in regional setup like Spain, Germany, Italy, because the more levels of implementation, the more difficult it becomes, of course, to have uniformity and completeness. Huh? So we look then whether the audit bodies in the member states are carrying out sufficiently reliable audit work. We look at the quality of internal control systems, which reliance we can put on the member states' authorities, and the number of authorities involved in the implementation of the plan. To give you an example on the next slide, if we take, for instance, a measure that foresees training of people. So here, I will just, excuse me for reading it out, because it's quite important. So we're talking about 12,000 pupils taking part in tuition programs. Those programs shall target pupils who were not able to fully participate in education because of the COVID. That tuition shall take place in individual or group form, maximum 5 pupils per group, in the afternoon, and it shall focus in particular on subjects from so-called main educational fields. Now, when you hear this description, I can already see at least 4 or 5 elements that we need to check. Now, obviously, when the Ministry of Education implements a measure through schools, through vocational training centers and what have you, it's essential that everybody understands when a pupil can be declared as a pupil belonging to the group. So we have divided the systems into 5 functional areas, which you see here. So the structure, the functions and capabilities of the authorities that are implementing the project or the operation, the definitions and reporting guidelines to the lower levels, that they are uniform, the data collection and reporting forms and tools, the data management process, how do you edit, how do you correct, how do you verify what is declared from the lower levels, and then obviously, and this is quite important, the aggregation of data at national level. You can imagine that in Spain, there's a first level of aggregation in a region and then a second one nationally. So this also needs to be quite adequate and accurate. In the next one, in terms of the system audits on the protection of the financial interest of the Union, if we move to the, so here also we apply risk analysis in cooperation with our colleagues from the OLAF and also from Europol. So we look at the proportion of the RRF to the member states' gross domestic product. Some member states have actually 12 to 14% of GDP under the RRP, the value. So that actually puts a big pressure on the absorption capacity. Then we look at the quality of the internal control system. The implementation structure, again, is a common factor. We get also information from our colleagues in the cohesion funds. What is the capacity to absorb? Do we have common bodies? Do we have assurance that we can draw from their work? And then other information like the rule of law report. Sometimes we have country-specific recommendations that target anti-fraud measures. We look at risks that our colleagues from the OLAF identify, whether the IT systems are in place, and then the use of the risk scoring tool, Arachne, whether that is in the member state applied or not. And then just as a final slide to give you an example. So here also we have some elements in a target here. We look then at the measure in the member state at the measures to prevent conflict of interest, to detect and correct if needed, the measures to avoid double funding, to detect double funding, and the measures to detect corruption and fraud. And you see here an example. This is probably a live case example of conflict of interest and how we can extract it from the risk scoring tool Arachne. So I'll stop here. I think that gives you a quite good overview of what we do and how we go about it. Thank you.
Thanks. It's really interesting to understand that one size does not fit all. Even though there are parameters that everybody has got to be within, if you're a more federalised country, you're going to have more layers perhaps than somewhere where it's sort of a single state. So really interesting. So that's almost the view from the centre. Sari, can I come to you? You've got a wealth of experience being head of the Audit Authority. Wondered if you could describe to us, how it feels on the ground. What do you do locally to audit these funds? Is there anything you do differently? Are there any peculiarities that you have to deal with?
Actually, there is a same kind of elements in our audits. And I think that our role as an internal audit unit of Ministry of Agriculture is to audit the process and analyze the responsibilities of the competent authorities and the whole administrative structure. And of course, we coordinate with other ministries because we audit the area of the our ministry, and there were many elements that should include in our audits as well. I should say that, for example, how effective is the internal control system in these cases, in these funds, and of course legality and regularity once again, and then we should analyze the risks because there should be many kinds of new structures and new elements, and of course these funds had quite quick timetables, so it might be one risk if we look at the whole picture. But I think it's quite a traditional system audit, and it will have same kind of elements to analyze the management and the control system as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Really interesting. I don't know whether you heard Ian and Anil speaking in the previous piece, but one of the things that they found in their analysis was actually the risk that we're talking about at the moment about what happened with all of those additional funds that went out during COVID or have gone out afterwards in response. And a number of the things that you mentioned there resonated with me from what we had seen in that analysis about, have there been double payments? Have people claimed on the right funds? All those sorts of things were actually there's quite a bit of data and understanding those structures that were put in place very quickly. That we have to work through and understand and get to grips with. So a lot of that feels very familiar from other things that I've sort of seen and heard. So that's really helpful. Thank you. You will have seen the Slido tab pop up at the bottom of the screen a little earlier, and we had asked you about how the collaboration is between the National Audit Office and the European Commission audit team for the audit of European funds in your country. We've obviously got to go away and do our homework as an audience here, because at the moment, I don't know is winning. We're seeing that strong, getting some movement around at the moment. So yeah, pretty much was feeling relatively equal for no collaboration, strong collaboration, and limited collaboration. Oh, no collaboration is just going ahead of the other two, but just under half of us don't know. I don't know whether this is a surprise or not to colleagues on this session. I certainly couldn't give you the answer, so I need to go away and brush up on things. So Mark, can I come to you and ask you what you think of those results?
Well, the I don't know is quite striking, because in the end, there is quite a bit of collaboration between the national auditors and the European ones. To give you an example, how we are currently working together with the audit authorities is we just finalized a set of bilateral meetings with each member state that started in January and ended last week. But for the audit work as such, and we also try to understand how they organize, how their risk assessment is done, what their audit strategy is going to be, their audit plan. But we have, as it happens, I'm meeting the Italians at 4 o'clock this afternoon. We have also with a couple of member states, we're trying a pilot project whereby we do the risk analysis of the elements contained in a payment request and ask them to audit a set of them, and we would do the other set, so that we don't overlap, we don't duplicate, and that we can come to a wider coverage of to a wider coverage of the elements in a payment request, and then higher assurance. Evidently, we are not going to just simply sit back and let the national auditors do or sit in their corner. We're going to also review their work in order to ensure that we sing from the same hymn sheet, of course. But in order to have a common understanding of what it is that we expect from each other or how we work, we have given complete transparent insight in our audit methodologies. So what we call inquiry planning memorandum, which is the basic document, strategic document setting out how we audit, for instance, the system audits on milestones and targets. We have shared with the member states our checklists. We have shared our audit plan and all the elements that are needed to mutually understand who is doing what and how. So from that aspect, I think we are counting very strongly also on the reliability of the audit bodies, because in the end, it's in our interest to have strong audit bodies in the member states, so that we again ensure that what we get in a payment request is accurate, is complete, and it's reliable.
Thank you. It's interesting. We have within the agency that I work in a specialist team that deal with the audit of the funds. And I have to say that one of my responsibilities in my role is for the quality of our internal audit work. I am very reliant on the work that is done at the centre on the quality of that team for how well they are performing, because it is a set of specialist tasks, and I think it's best to leave that to kind of as a competent authority rather than try to recreate things myself. So you look at whether you can rely on their work, and I hopefully then can rely on the work that's done over them from a quality perspective. So that's interesting to hear. Sorry, if I can turn to you. I don't know whether the results to that poll surprised you, or whether you expected to see those sorts of results.
Yes, it was quite. I was quite surprised because I thought maybe I thought that there is more connections and more cooperations, but as Mark said earlier, it's very the cooperation between Commission and audit authorities it's very close, and it's very, we have those meetings, bilateral meetings every year, and it works very well. It's very open, and sometimes it's of course it's very intense during that time when we have deadlines, when we should leave our reports and our assurance and close, and when it's the annual closure of the year. So I think we have used to cooperate very often with Commission, and that is why it's quite a surprise. Yes.
I do wonder whether actually it's so efficient and effective that if you're not directly involved, as I say, we have a specialist team in the organisation I work in, that if you're not directly involved, it's so efficient and effective that you almost, that the team does something, but you don't know the ins and outs of it because it all just happens as a matter of course. And I wonder whether there's some of that in some of the responses. Who knows? I wondered if you could describe to us how you are able to maintain and demonstrate your independence in the whole process around the audit of the funds. What are the best practices out there in both your independence and objectivity and your work on the funds, and what challenges do you face from time to time?
To me?
If we start with Sari, and then I'll come across to you, Mark, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. I can start with a few things, few main points. I think that the best practices are quite familiar with us all. Let's say quite classical anyway. So they are organizational independence, like independence from other authorities, managing authorities, certifying authority, etc. And for example, independence of my unit is very classical and clear because we are organized directly under the top management, and I report to her, so it's quite clear anyway. And a very important thing is of course the accurate documentation as well, like the charter and the guidance of the auditors, that everybody knows what should be done if there is any doubt about one's independence, for example. And very important thing in this area is to that there is not any kind of limitation of audit strategy of audit authority, and audit authority should be free to decide the audit plan, timetables, and that sort of things. But if we talk about challenges, there could be the situations when the head of internal audit unit, head of the audit authority, or some auditors may be asked to take on additional roles and responsibilities outside of the audit work, such as, for example, responsibility for compliance or risk management activities. These roles and responsibilities may impair or appear to impair the organizational independence of the internal audit activity or the individual objectivity of the internal auditor. And one thing is also the membership of the expert groups, for example, national expert groups which deal with IT matters, and so they may also cause uncertainty about independence. However, it is very important to participate those groups and take of course consultative roles. But I think that's these are the main ideas that I picked up. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. So as you say, you know, some very sort of classical things there that we would expect to see in any type of audit as far as maintaining your independence goes. And yeah, it's those additional roles that can trip us up, isn't it? And it's how you manage those and make sure that there isn't a clash. I mean, I note that now that we have the updated version of the 3 lines model from the Institute of Internal Auditors, even they accept to a greater degree than previously that there may be some blurring of the lines in those models, and very often with things like compliance, assurance mapping, things like that, we might look and say they're the remit of management. You're the people with the know-how, you're the subject matter experts who know how to do this, and you want to help your customers, but you also don't want to get to a point where you go, I'm doing management roles. So it's that balancing act, and what do you do to manage the impairment? Mark, if we could get a view from you on how you make sure that you're managing that independence and objectivity where you need to.
Confronted with 2 types of independence, in a sense, the internal and the external. So internally, we are fully separated from the people who implement and manage the facility. So our reporting lines, for instance, go directly to the Director General. There's nobody else in between, except for my director, of course, but we immediately report to him so that he's aware as financially responsible in the member states. Now, obviously, it's not something he can likely put aside, because we also get audited by the Court of Auditors, and we get later on in the discharge procedure with Parliament and the Council, the European Parliament and the European Council. So any areas of concern, it's in his interest to correct those before we come to the audit of the Court of Auditors. So there, that actually supports our role and our independence. When we look then at our colleagues in the member states, of course, that's more tricky, because evidently there's always this tension between national interests and providing assurance to the Commission. It's inevitable. I mean, we understand this. Some member states are certainly a lot more independent than others. We have to admit, but that doesn't mean that the auditors don't provide good, reliable work. It's just sometimes we see that the conclusions drawn are not exactly what we would expect them to be based on the facts and on the observations. So if you give an unqualified opinion, but you have then a long list of deficiencies, it's probably then telling the Commission, look, there's something wrong, but we don't want to spell it out as such because we will be the first target inside the member state. I'm also, a second example that I can give, I'm also always rather skeptical when we get a set of accounts, like at the time when I was working in cohesion, with a 0% error rate. So auditors have to sample statistically, have to check the expenditure, and then come up with a 0% error rate. It's rather, you know, I would say not unbelievable, but unlikely to happen. My colleagues often make fun of me that I say I'm more inclined to believe somebody who tells me the error rate is 8% than somebody who tells me the error rate is 0%, because then at least you know that errors are detected. So there, obviously, we carry out further work to see what is now happening in reality, and then of course it defines a little bit the level of assurance that we have on the independence of the audit authority and the quality of the work, not only the independence. So that's a little bit the balancing act that we have to make. But in the end of the day, for the Recovery and Resilience Facility today, and I'm speaking about now when we start, we have decided, and this is very hard, we have decided at this stage not to put any reliance yet on the work of the audit authorities until we have had the chance to see how they work, because it's something new for everybody, also for them. We want to see first, does everybody understand and act as expected?
That makes perfect sense, doesn't it? When something's new, you have to go through that proving period to understand how it's all working. Yeah, it's interesting. In the agency that I work in, we've just brought in a new declaration of interest. We used to talk about conflicts of interest, and now we talk about people declaring their interests, and then a view is taken in discussion with management about whether that brings about a conflict or not. But you know, to try and aid transparency, we've said to people, anything that you know where you've got an interest, declare it. Then we'll then talk about whether it needs to be a conflict that's managed, because it's always easier to say, yes, that's been declared and we've considered it, than suddenly you get, you know, partway through a piece of work and somebody says, but did you know? So it's that thing about being, you know, sort of clear and open and transparent, isn't it?
Yeah, we actually have two sets of declarations of absence of conflict of interest. So everybody who joins the commission has to declare whether there are issues that might bring a person into conflict of interest. So that's the standard procedure. But when we do a specific audit, then of course we are going to select ministries, agencies, beneficiaries. So every auditor who leaves on a mission signs first, I have no conflict of interest with any of these beneficiaries or agencies that we're going to audit. It has happened in the past that somebody says, well, I don't have a conflict of interest myself, but my brother's wife works for the Ministry of Education, so I could get in conflict there. Okay, no problem. We just put you on another file, and we allow somebody else to lead the audit at that level.
It just makes it much cleaner and more transparent, doesn't it, if you can do that up front? Yeah, we're similar, where we go through an annual process within our organisation once a year. But again, when people start to get allocated to, you know, pieces of work, that's when, you know, it's a look again, because it's really easy when you do the annual process. Everybody remembers what they've got to tell you, but if circumstances change part way through, that's when people forget, oh, I should have updated that and the gifts and hospitality register, where you have to remind everybody to put things in. Not that any of us have been doing much travelling or having, you know, many gifts or hospitality over the past couple of years, although, you know, different depending on your role. But there you go. Thank you. So doesn't matter which part of audit you work in, a number of the things that we've got to manage around our independence and objectivity are very similar, aren't they? Okay, thank you for that. Right. You've already started to allude to some of this, but I think if we can start to draw this out a little more, we've been talking a bit about what can we do to avoid duplication, to increase coverage, and to better coordinate our work. So if we could just dive a little bit, you know, more deeply into that. Mark, you'd already started to discuss some of that. So if I can come to you and just get your view about, you know, where that works, where you've seen good practice, and then I'll ask Sari how it feels from her side of things.
Yeah, I can quote you two examples, three examples actually. So during the bilateral meetings that we had now recently with the member states, there are certain audit bodies, like for instance, the Slovak audit body, just to name one, who told us we have an intention to audit each and every milestone and target prior to the submission of the payment request. Now, obviously, for us, that's the ideal situation. There we can see from the reports what is going on. We ask them, we can do a fact-finding mission if we have certain questions. And then later on, when we do the audit, we don't have to travel in the country. We can go to Bratislava, go to the audit authority's office in the Ministry of Finance, check their files. If that work is conclusive, we stop there. If the work is not conclusive, of course, we have to continue. With the Danish colleagues, and the Italian colleagues, as I mentioned, we discussed whether we can split the work. Now, obviously here, there's one caveat. We have done our risk assessment on the payment requests, so on the investments there. They will have their risk assessment, of course, which might not completely overlap. So there we have to see with them whether we are in agreement to find a common set of investments to audit, and then see how we split the work between ourselves. But again, as I said, it's very open, it's very transparent and collaborative, which makes it, of course, from our perspective, a lot more interesting. The only downside here is more that their audit work will mostly be after we have made the payment or after the payment has been submitted, because they don't want to delay the payment with audit work and so on. So that's a little bit what we have to take into consideration and the risk that we run. So, but it's not dramatic, it's not catastrophic. We can still arrange it so that it's done before we have to submit our accounts to our DG budget, and then still have the assurance that all elements contained in the payment requests are eligible, legal, and regular.
Sorry, how does it work from you? How do you coordinate your work to get the best coverage possible and avoid that duplication?
I think there are a few important points, and one point is the single audit method procedure. That Commission auditors, when they come to Finland, they audit us, audit authority, and single audit procedure is I think it's quite effective, and in fishery and maritime funds it has worked quite well actually. But the other thing is that national audit authority and EU Commission auditors are the team, and it's very important thing. Once when I had a lot of stress, and it was very tough timetable, and the deadlines were quite under the they were coming very soon. We had a phone call with commission and my colleague said that the Commission auditor said to me that, Sari, you must remember that we are the team and we cooperate, and we are cooperate openly. So it was very important moment for me, and I didn't have so much stress anymore. So it was great to hear anyway. And of course, very important is those things that Mark said, that the cooperation must be open, and of course the working together must be transparent, and of course working as the team. It means that it must be the cooperation must be timely basis. It's very important, and the information exchange concerning EU auditors checklists, they have improved our work as audit authority in our ministry, and also quite a long time ago when I was the winding up body. The experiences from very old programming period 2000 and 2006 were very good. When we got the checklists that were used by commission auditors, we were much more wiser when we saw those questions and those main points that they used those days. And after that, I have had the same experience of using those checklists and those guidelines. In summary, I think the most important thing is to remember common target that we share, that management and control systems work well and error rates are low. However, Mark just said that if error rate is 8%, it might be good thing, but I think the target is anyway that error rates are quite low, under 2%. And of course, maybe the most important thing is that subsidies produce results, and we auditors know what we are doing all the time.
Thank you. I smiled when I heard the comment about checklists, because I know that in my team we're responsible for the internal audit methodology and the guidance that goes out, and we, checklists have their place, and they're very valuable. They can be really valuable teaching tools when somebody is first learning how to do something, because it helps step them through. But honestly, if there's one word that I can say to my auditors in my organisation that makes most of them groan, it's checklists. And it's like, go and read Atul Gawande's book about how it saves lives in hospitals. A checklist can really be your friend. But I've still got to persuade my auditors that actually there is a place for them and they can be really valuable. So it's good to hear you having a good experience with those and seeing it really helping your work. I shall go away and talk about that when I'm next saying, and here's a checklist for you. Mark, you look like you want to jump in there.
Yeah, I do feel some sympathy for your auditors when they complain. But in the end, what we need to understand is that we are in the assurance business. We provide assurance to management. We provide also assurance to the taxpayer. So we are also accountable then for what we declare, what we conclude. So that checklist that we are using is also a tool to demonstrate that our work is complete, so that we haven't skipped any corner, anything, that we haven't cut any corners. So also there, when our colleagues from the Court of Auditors come, in our case, that is then, we can demonstrate, look, this is the basis on which we came to conclusions, and they can then see that we did a serious work, which is going to benefit everybody.
Yeah, that's a really good point to remember, isn't it? We've got to be able to evidence our work and the completeness and accuracy of that. And if that's one of the tools we can use, it's it's very helpful. Right, I'm going to see what our audience want to ask us about what they've just heard. Right, so first one is a question for Mark. Quality of internal control systems. Do you take into account the presence and resources of internal audit? And if so, how do you do that?
Yeah, this is something that we assessed also in the framework of the evaluation or the approval of the plans. So member states, and especially then the audit bodies and the coordinating body in our case, had to demonstrate having sufficient resources, which was not always the case, by the way. So we asked in most cases the body concerned to provide us with a workload analysis, a needs analysis. And then on that basis, we asked them to ensure that the resources were present. Now, what we also did to a very large extent is to avoid that somebody says, okay, we are working for cohesion, we are working for the agriculture fund, and now we are working for the recovery and resilience facility. So we'll just take some resources from another department and put them on the RF, because we cannot strip Paul to dress Pierre, to dress Peter. So you need to look at it from a holistic perspective. so that the resources are sufficient to audit all funds and not, save somebody's skin while killing somebody else.
Yeah. Sorry, if I can ask, is there anything specific that you do when to think about the resources that you need and go about making sure that you've got those in place, sort of the other side of the coin?
I think it's always. I think it's quite challenging to talk about resources in these EU tasks because we usually have very small teams, small groups, small unit, and in my unit there is 6 auditors, and I think. And we have so many projects and so many audits per year that there is always lack of resources. But anyway, I think it's of course it's also a question of coordination with other audit units and other professionals. So and of course we can, in our charter there is a sentence that we can use outsourcing. We can buy experts and that sort of thing. It's important line there, of course. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And I think it's you paint a picture that I think everybody involved in audit at the moment recognises that there is so much work for us to do, and there never seem to be enough auditors to go round. And it's a real shame because I think it's such an exciting role that we play, but for whatever reason, nobody grows up saying they want to be an internal or an external auditor, do they? And it's only when people stumble into the work and they go, wow, I get to see so much of an organisation. I'm responsible for so much. I play such an important role. But we're not top of anybody's list. Everybody wants to be a train driver or an astronaut, or these days a celebrity, whatever that might mean when you speak to the youngsters. If we can go back to the questions, thank you for that. Resources are age-old issue. We come back to our continuing topic throughout the day. What are your recommendations to strengthen collaboration between the national auditors and the auditors from the Commission? What would be your top tips? Mark, I'll look at you first.
Okay. Well, I think transparency would be on the top of my list. Sometimes, and I understand this, sometimes, and especially with newly appointed audit bodies, they see us as these people sitting in Brussels who are very angry people. They're going to shout at us if we do something wrong, which is obviously totally not the case. But we, in all our communications with the member states, we have said, if you have a question, if you have a doubt, pick up the phone. It's better to speak before you act and to try to prevent a mistake from happening than afterwards telling us, look, this is what we did. We come to the conclusion it's not complete, it's wrong, it's not to our expectations. And then, of course, all this work is done for nothing. We also have cases where auditors, after having run an audit, call us and say, look, this and this and this is what we found, but this is what we're going to conclude. So you know what's behind it. We are going to be completely transparent, up to you to draw the conclusions then later on, should there be a correction or not, whatever the case is. But I think our and actually what Sari said about we are a team is exactly what we are trying to promote. We know each other's roles, we know the limitations of each other's roles, but then there is still enough field to cover and to come to a common understanding and collaboration. So we have very, very close contacts with our colleagues in the member states, and from those contacts you quickly understand who works in which manner and where do we have doubts and where can we be more or less reassured that the work is done completely. So we're just trying to promote this further. not only by having formal meetings, because that's the one thing you don't want, always these formal meetings where everybody sits for 2 hours around the table, but just briefly, short context. I have a question, I have a doubt, here's the answer, and or we don't know the answer, we'll find out and let you know. But having a very agile and immediate response, it always helps each other.
Sorry, I think you gave us a great list a bit earlier, including, as Mark's alluded to, that idea that ultimately we're one team with the same aim. Is there anything that you'd like to add on, you know, what gives rise to the best cooperation?
Maybe one thing I would like to add the activity that when and that we cooperate very so open that it's what is possible. But I think the active attitude is very important as well, because when we have those phone calls and maybe hundreds of emails and that sort of thing, and maybe a fact-finding mission as we had this year remotely. It's always the better when all participants are very active and ask questions, and I think it's the most important thing. Yes.
Great. Yeah, I did smile. When I was training many years ago now, I was always told that there is no such thing as a stupid question. You know, it's better to ask. I think once in my life I have regretted telling somebody that. But oh, the minutiae. But actually, overall, it's, you know, it's a good maxim to have. You're better to ask. And that idea of proactivity, I'll give you a call, I'll let you know what's happening. It's that whole thing that we talk about in audits, isn't it? No surprises. Mm-hmm. And that should hold as good when we're working between each other as when we're working with, you know, sort of the end customer or client.
Yeah, to bear in mind, we are solution oriented.
Yeah.
That's what I always say. If I remember anecdotally, I remember a colleague in the member states who told me, Mark, I'm going to submit you my annual control report, but I'm telling you already now, I forgot to include a certain part of the expenditure in my audit work. What are we going to do? So I said, don't worry, describe it. We'll measure the risk and the impact, and we'll see if we have to, you know, take corrective actions or not. In the end, it turned out to be less tough or less difficult than initially anticipated by her. And we came out with a recommendation, okay, start doing it now and complete it as quickly as possible, but before the next payment request, which was done, and nobody had to bleed, nobody had to suffer any reputational damage. So this is something that you can only do when you communicate. If it comes to us like bluntly on our table, then of course you might jump to different conclusions. That's obvious.
Right. I think we've probably got time for one last question if we've got any more. See if we get any flashed up for us. Ooh, we've got a couple here, so I'll let you take your choice on which one you want to answer. One is, could you give information about the audit standards that are applied? And the other is whether you think that a protocol or a memorandum of understanding is good practice to formalise the collaboration between internal and external auditors. Sorry, have you got any views on either of those?
The standard question, we, of course, the internal or international internal audit standards are the most important for us, and of course, those parts of international external audit standards as well as we follow the guidance of the Commission, and there are many elements of those standards. But yes, they are the most important. Yes.
Yeah, I always find that it's a really interesting mix, isn't it, of that integration of aspects of internal auditing with aspects of external auditing, and you've got to bring the two together in harmony, which is which is interesting. Mark, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, this has been subject to a long debate some years ago in the Commission, because obviously we're not auditing company accounts, so that's typically not what we do, and our work is such that you couldn't even start to compare it to auditing accounts. So we were then looking at what other standards would be applicable, and in the end, I think the biggest debate was between agreed upon procedures or the INTOSAI 4000 standards. So we opted for the INTOSAI 4000, which is more like the compliance approach, as they seem to fit better what we do. So it's compliance, it's system audits, it's assurance towards the Commission. So I think with that we are quite well positioned. We then were also evaluated by one of the Big Four. I think it was Moore Stevens who did a review of our audit work, and they confirmed that we were compliant with the standards that we chose to apply, which was, we were very happy for that.
Good stuff. That's probably the most frightening part in any auditor's role, isn't it? Is when you get audited yourself. I know when I had the EQA for the agency coming up a couple of years ago, you know, you're in trepidation, aren't you, when another expert looks at your work. There you go. Thank you both for taking us through that. Yeah, it's one of those worlds where in my role, I come up against it tangentially a number of times, but it's good to hear from the experts and understand what works. But what is great is to see that there are always so many more similarities and things that we've all got in common than anything that sets us apart. And, you know, we may look at specific things, but actually the way that we work, what we have to think about, the challenges we face, you know, they're all pretty much the same, aren't they? We're all auditors under the skin when it comes down to it. So it's been great to hear from you both and have you share your experiences with us. Thank you very much.
With pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sun is still shining here in Finland, so it's great.
I'm very, very jealous. Thank you for the weather report.
Okay.
Look forward to seeing you soon. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.